We're starting to get into that middle stretch of the season where every single win is more important than ever. Week 6 waivers on tap today. Let's get into it. We're going to kick off the list here with Kirk Cousins. Let's not forget what he did on Thursday night in week 5. 500 plus passing yards, 4 touchdowns, both, of course, his career high with the Atlanta Falcons. 500 is just simply his career high. 48 fantasy points. It's absolutely insane. You don't get that without mobility, and Kirk Cousins found a way to do it. No doubt the best player on the week, of course. Quarterback won as well on the week, and hey, he was on your waivers. This is a guy that, sure, we can only expect, let's say, 15 to 20 points a week from Kirk Cousins. But again, he doesn't bring us the highest upside. But at this point, with the week he just had, maybe they're figuring things out there in Atlanta. And if he can give us solid production throughout the remainder of the season, he needs to be on our rosters. So again, he's owned in the majority of leagues. Don't expect him to be there. But if he is, he's a great backup option. Tank Bigsby, he was on the thumbnail of the video. And why? Well, over the last 2 weeks, 21 touches, 210 yards, which if you average it out, he's averaging 10 yards a touch. What does that mean? That means he's getting you a fantasy point every single time he touches the ball. He's added on 2 touchdowns over the last 2 weeks as well. He's just a very explosive back. Of course, second-year man out of Auburn. We saw the flashes 2 years ago in college. Last year, we didn't see any of them in his rookie year. So we thought, okay, whatever, on to the next backup. But now he's starting to find his stride. I just think he's a great handcuff option, right? Whether if anything happens with ETN, who doesn't have the greatest track history of health. Again, if anything happens to him, Tank Bigsby, boom, you picked him up as a flyer, as a handcuff option, and then he is a top 12 running back if ETN does decide to go down. But it is really a 50-50 split here in Jacksonville, and who knows, maybe that win last week was all they needed to get this offense in the right direction. LAZARD has been on these videos for about a month now. He's giving us just consistent 12 fantasy points a game, really over the last month or so, but really over the last 3 weeks. Rodgers loves him. There's a connection there, and I think this is going to be your last chance to get him, especially because he just gave us another 14-point fantasy performance. So LAZARD needs to be on your roster at the bare minimum. Keep him away from your league mates. TUTU ATWELL, look, a lot of the same can be said here. Consistent 12 fantasy point games in 3 straight weeks. That is good production out of a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 if you're dealing with injuries. For example, if you have Cooper Kupp and or Puka Nacua, a guy like TUTU should be starting for you until they come back. Now, I will throw this out there. TUTU is a great option to pick up, but you might be able to wait a week because they're going into a bye week. And again, Cooper Kupp might be back after the bye week, but even if Cooper Kupp is back, he's going to have limited action in his first return to play. So TUTU is going to be the guy that you should target, not Jordan Whittington, for the simple fact that when everyone was healthy in this offense, TUTU was still involved. Josh Downs, this is a guy that is a tricky wide receiver option. And this is why, because over the last 2 weeks, he's averaging 8.5 receptions a game and 10.5 targets. That is elite production. But here's the kicker. His quarterback is not going to be Joe Flacco going forward. It's going to be Anthony Richardson. And when Anthony Richardson was his quarterback, this is one of the most forgettable wide receivers in the league. So going forward, if Richardson's going to be the starter, you don't really want to play Josh Downs. But if Joe Flacco is going to be the starter, Josh Downs, I would say, has to be a starting wide receiver in fantasy at this point in the season, because this is a guy that over the last 2 weeks has been a top 10 wide receiver, averaging 19 fantasy points a game. He is winning us our weeks with Joe Flacco at the helm. So I will say this, if you have an extra kicker on your roster or an extra defense, go after Josh Downs, stash him, and in any case of Richardson going down in the future, you're going to want to start Josh Downs. At the tight end position, let's talk about Tyler Conklin. Over the last 3 weeks, he's been very solid at a position that nobody knows what they're getting. Whether if you have Travis Kelce or whether if you have Tyler Conklin, you don't know what you're going to get on a week-to-week basis from your tight end in our fantasy lineups. But I will say this, Conklin has been consistent. 5 receptions a game, 7.5 targets over the last 3 weeks, top 5 tight end in that stretch, giving us, again, double-digit fantasy points production. Now, I will say He's not finding the end zone as much as we would like to see, but again, for such an inconsistent position in fantasy, we just want consistency when where we can find it. Tyler Conklin gives us that. At the kicker position, look, it's going to be Will Reichard. He's going to be here until he's owned in more than 50% of leagues. He's giving us 10 fantasy points a game on the season. 3 games this year where he's over 12 fantasy points. He's just in a great offense. An offense that's going to put him in a position to score a lot of fantasy points throughout the remainder of the season. There's tons of opportunity for him. Will Reichard needs to be on your roster. All right, let's go into the quick recap here. Of course, behind me, we have the owned percentages of Cousins and Tank Bigsby. If you missed it, skip back earlier to the video. But here is the quick recap. Cousins at quarterback, Bigsby, Tyrone Tracy. Great performance last week, but Singleton might be back next week. So, again, he might be just another great handcuff option. LAZARD, TUTU, Atwell. We talked about those guys. Josh Downs, of course, we mentioned. Michael Wilson could be an interesting option as Marvin Harrison seems to be very boom or bust. There's not really an in-between with Marvin Harrison. So Michael Wilson going throughout the remainder of the season, while Marvin Harrison continues to try and get more and more comfortable at this level of football, he might be a solid, deeper league option. Same with Jalen Tolbert. Breakout performance on Sunday Night Football just yesterday. So Jalen Tolbert could be a guy to stash on your roster. Conklin, Reichard, we talked about. That's going to do it here for today's video. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about your lineup this weekend. I'm here for a second opinion.